shootings. Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. I'm talking about whether mental illness is the wrong scapegoat following mass shootings. Certainly that's part of where the conversation goes after these mass shootings. We are streaming this live on our Facebook page. Several comments there. Terrence Rollins says children are getting access to firearms, and they should not because of many different reasons. Others disagree with that and much of what you all are saying in many different ways. And so it's an interesting kind of robust debate on Facebook. I also want to go now to the phones. Let's go to Shelley. Hello, Shelley.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Yes, I disagree a lot on the mental illness. It may have a little part in it, but I really think a lot of it starts out with bullying. Like in the schools, the teachers and the supervisors, the kids will tell them about it, and they're not doing anything about it.
So you think that is an issue that needs to be addressed? Okay. What do you think of what Shelley's saying there?
Well, you know, one way that we might think about an observation like this, which is something that while our research doesn't speak directly to it, is certainly a major part of this consideration. I think it goes back to a point that Jonathan was making earlier, the fact that, yes, of course we want to talk about mental illness, but it's something that needs to be considered in context. You know, it needs to be put in the context of people's everyday relationships, of their networks and social support, the institutional settings that they're in, and what kinds of resources they have access to in those sorts of places, and also questions of access to guns, right? So, if guns are present along with a combination of other factors that are liable to produce violence, that tells us that there's a greater likelihood that that violence can happen, and that it will be potentially serious and lethal. And like I said a moment ago, you know, this is a multifactorial problem. There's no one single origin for it and no one single solution, but absolutely thinking about the kinds of climates that, you know, if we want to talk specifically about school violence, the kinds of climates that kids are finding themselves in and the kinds of resources they have access to, I'd say that absolutely falls under this sort of broader consideration of thinking about these things in context and not just trying to narrow it down to one determining factor.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I did. I think the question of bullying is an important one because it certainly comes up a lot. And again, there are two stories, I think. First is just to validate what the caller is saying. I mean, I do think that we see particular histories in the people who have committed mass shootings, sometimes who are very often in these high-profile mass shootings, white male, aggrieved, access to guns, bullying has been a part. The problem is, I don't think we can use that as a predictive factor. That's really the problem. In other words, if you wanted to profile everybody who's been bullied and say which one of those people is going to go on to commit a violent crime, a mass shooting, I think it's just statistically impossible. So there's a difference between what we learn from the very gut-wrenching and important psychological histories of mass shooters versus what we can predict as a society, right? And so I think that's where Ken's point comes in, that it's not like we can restrict a gun to everybody who's been bullied. It's more, let's not have guns in places that are high risk, right? We want to be smart about gun laws, and so that's where prevention, I think, takes the place of prediction, right? Because
Jackie Welton DePillo on Facebook says there's a simple mouth swab that should be mandated to see if a person's on antipsychotic drugs, and then goes on from there, basically questioning whether that could be used to help in determine mental illness and that kind of thing with guns. You know, what do you say about that?
Well, I think this question of it's not antipsychotics, to be honest. It doesn't come up that much, but antidepressants have been part of this conversation since the Columbine shooting, right, where the two shooters were taking SSRI antidepressants. So again, it's if you think about all the people who are on psychiatric medication in this country, and then the minuscule percentage who go on even to shoot a gun, let alone to shoot somebody else, let alone to commit a mass shooting, it's just really a question of simple math, that there's no one test. As much as, I mean, again, I think what we're hearing from the callers is the same question we have, which is we want to do something to stop this, but unfortunately there's no easy answer. And so this idea that there is a subset of people who are on psychiatric medication, if you just think about, I mean, everybody has at least 3 relatives who are taking psychiatric medication. So just think about all the people in the world who are taking that. What percentage go on to commit a mass shooting? It's like 0.0001%, or if that. And so in a way, there's unfortunately nothing predictive, and certainly if a drug was going to cause that kind of side effect, it would probably get taken off the market long before.
Let's go to Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hey.
Go right ahead.
All right, guys, we've been talking about mental illness and all the things that go on. I want to know why, and we talk about gun control as a solution. What about punishment for the people that perpetrate the crimes as a deterrent for them to quit doing crimes? Things go on every day in this country, and we have a lot of leniency towards bad things for bad people. I think if we would stiffen up on the punishments, a lot of these people might have a second thought about doing what they do.
All right. And now, again, you all have done a lot of research on these shootings, and that's something we hear. What do you think about what he's saying there? Enforce the laws and be more strict.
Well, you know, I appreciate the caller's comment, and I don't know that that anyone in this debate is necessarily calling for you know, the loosening of penalties for serious violent crimes in the context of these sort of discussions. But I think one of the things that that Chris's comments can help remind us of is that there are varieties of violent behavior that are, in fact, very good, very strong predictors for future violent behavior. Jonathan, a little bit earlier, mentioned gun violence restraining orders, which are in some states and jurisdictions issued in instances of domestic violence. And intimate partner violence is, in fact, one of the contexts that is most likely to lead to death by gun when guns are present. That there's this is another one of these strong associations that does show up. And so in that sense, I think the caller's point is well taken, that there are settings we can point to where there are patterns of violence that are already ongoing, and where the enforcement of existing laws or the strengthening or the implementation of new laws that allows that would make it possible for law enforcement to intervene and restrict or control, at least temporarily, the access of folks who have already demonstrated a capacity for violence and already inflicted violence on other people. You know, people who are especially vulnerable in this instance.
We hear this from time to time. What do you think? I mean, enforce the laws on the book, be more strict about it.
I'm all for enforcing laws on the books. Unfortunately, there's a problem with which laws are on the books where. So I think there are laws on the books that we should be enforcing more, and we should be closing loopholes in those laws. I'll give you one example, which is the background check system. If we enforced a uniformity in the background check system is designed to identify high-risk people, not just for mass shootings, which is partially what we're talking about here, but also for the epidemic of everyday gun death that we have in this country. We have 40,000, nearing 40,000 gun deaths a year in this country. So the background check system is one example where if somebody has a history of partner violence, of severe hospitalized mental illness, of aggression toward other people, some kind of felony or federal offense, they're going to be flagged on the background check system. The problem with that law is that there are loopholes so large you can drive trucks through them because you can buy a gun at a gun show. There are problems with how we access data, put data, it varies by state, into the background check system. So certainly I agree that if we want to enforce that law in a national uniform way, I would agree with that. Ken mentioned what are called GVROs. The idea behind a GVRO is that if somebody comes to see me as a psychiatrist, I see them for 20 minutes. If police go to see somebody, they see them for 20 minutes. They don't know what that person was like last month or last year. But somebody who lived with that person, they're certainly going to know if somebody's going to escalate. And so, in that sense, laws, states, Washington just passed a law like this to say there has to be an avenue for people who have been abused, who see their partners getting worse, who have access to guns.
These are restraining orders.
These are restraining orders. And so,
yeah.
In a way, that's another great law. So there are guns. I mean, right now, banning bump stocks. That's another law that we're talking about. So I think there are laws on the books. And as Ken was mentioning before, if you just look at states that enforce background checks more strictly, you'll see things, not just mass shootings go down, but shootings of police, suicides, partner violence. These things all get cut in about half.
Let's go to Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan.
Well, good afternoon. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, I had a question. You know, back about 30, 40 years ago, people used to make fun of kids that were homeschooled.
Okay.
At least where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
But now, you think kids maybe should stay at home with their parents or you know, the home environment.
So you think that would be, I mean, I know there are a lot of parents that are so concerned about what's been happening that they are keeping their kids home, but you're saying that is a solution or something that people should be doing? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it might be a diversion to show, hey, you know, we're keeping our kids at home. We love them. You know, they're not being bullied. They're not being shot. They're not being, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's unfortunate it comes to that, but what do you have to say?
I mean, I
about
could
that?
maybe jump in there. I can understand. I mean, I talk to a lot of parents, and people are terrified right now. You know, sending your kid to school should be the safest place. They're taken care of. That's the whole idea of what school's about. And so people are terrified and they're searching. They don't want to put their kids in harm's way. And so I can understand why people might think, well, let's just homeschool right now. And certainly I'm hearing that from a lot of people. I think the larger point though is that you know, what's going to happen? First of all, what's going to happen to schools if we militarize schools, which I think is the risk? Is that going to make people feel safer at schools if we have armed teachers, if we have armed guards, factors like that? I mean, there was a shooting today that was, I think, stopped by an armed person. But I guess just for me, because I think about this stuff a lot, I honestly think about mass shootings as a form of terrorism, in a way where you're trying to do is foment terror in a place where people should feel safe, and innocent victims, innocent civilians are killed. And so I personally feel like, beside the question of what would a school feel like if all the teachers were carrying weapons, which I don't want to see a lot of my second or third grade teachers carrying weapons, it's also that I think terrorism is just going to shift its object to another safe space. So all of a sudden it'll be a movie theater, it'll be the drive-through, it'll be something like that. So I think it's really a bigger question about what kind of world do we want to live in. And I can understand wanting to keep your kids home, but hopefully we can instead ask, how can we make society better so people feel safe?
Let's take a break. We are continuing to stream this on our Facebook page, so you can put a comment there. We'll read some of those. Also, hold on the line. Lucy, David, Jackie, others, hold on the line. We'll take your call. Be back right after this.